it is impossible to do an episodic podcast discussing the folklore, myths, and legends of Scotland without quickly arriving at one of my personal favourite topics: witches. Many may not know, but witches, both in reality and in tall tale, played an important role in this country's development and growth. But due to the dark reality of the witch trials, many think it is a subject in our history that is best left forgotten. When speaking of witch trials, many would first think of the infamous events in Salem, Massachusetts. Over a 15-month period between February 1692 and May 1693, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft in Salem, mostly women and children. Of those accused, 25 people ended up losing their lives, 19 by hanging, 5 died in prison, and 1 was pressed to death. While these events were atrocious, they don't hold a candle to the trials that took place right here in bonny Scotland. Like in Salem, witch hunts took place in religious communities, but Scotland at the time was in religious turmoil, as we discuss in our episode on Greyfriars, the Mackenzie Poltergeist, and the Covenanters prison. This ever-changing religious landscape made it easy for neighbours to point the finger at one another, and as a result, many were accused of witchcraft. Just how many, it is hard to say for sure, but the results of the accusations went on to change the landscape of the country forever. Between 3,000 and 4,000 of those accused were tortured and put to death as witches. This is over 5 times the European average. The witch trials en masse are credited with starting in North Berwick, a small seaside town on the east coast of the country, in the year 1590. During these trials, the suspected witches were believed to have convened with the devil and attempted to use magic to sink the ship of King James VI. In a 2-year period, over 70 witches lost their lives in this small town, with many more being accused and tortured. The trials would then spread across the country like wildfire, until persecution finally came to an end in 1727, when the last person accused of witchcraft in Scotland was executed. This is almost half a century later than the last execution that occurred in our neighbour to the south, England, with their final witch execution occurring in 1682. Comparatively, England only killed around 500 people next to our 4,000. In future episodes, we will investigate many of these trials in more detail and go in depth on the heinous acts committed. But today, we're going to move from reality and back to folklore with a story from Fife. In the Kingdom of Fife, there lived a man and his wife. The couple were elderly and lived relatively quiet lives. Or at least the man did. The wife was a bit more of a free spirit, and every new moon she would vanish in the evening and not appear until morning. Many whispered that his wife was a witch, and the man himself was curious of this, until one day he gathered the courage to ask her. Without a moment's hesitation, the wife smiled. "I am a witch," she said. The man was horrified. His wife begged him not to tell, for she knew she would be put to death. She said, "I tell you what, next time I go out, I will tell you all about it." Well, the man didn't want his wife killed, so agreed. The next new moon came around, and sure enough in the evening, the wife vanished. She came back the next morning and told her husband the tale. According to her, she met 3 fellow witches, where the 3 of them took branches of an oak tree and flew off in them, and then they turned into horses, and they rode them across the country. They rode to the top of Ben Lomond and looked down on the loch below, where a small man appeared from under a mossy stone and played the pipes to them, and the 4 witches drank and partied with the fairy before going hunting into the early hours and returning home. "What better are you for any of this?" the man asked his wife. "Surely you would have been more comfortable here in bed." With that, he went away. The next new moon came around, and sure enough, the wife vanished. She came home the next morning and told her husband how she and her 3 friends met at the shores of the Forth. The 4 of them turned shells into a boat and sailed across to Norway, where they met all different kinds of fae, mermaids, and creatures galore, even gods. And they partied in the night. They drank and told tales, and the fairy told the witches of a magic word, a word that could free them from any bonds and transport them to wherever they wanted to be. Gleeful about their new power, the witches returned home to Fife. "Surely you would have been warmer here at home," the husband said to his wife, and stormed off. A month later, the husband was more interested in his wife's tale, for she told him how the Bishop of Carlisle had the finest wine in his cellar, and the husband loved a glass of wine. And so she told him that after discovering this wine, her and her friend used the magic words they learned from the fairy and transported themselves up their chimney and into the Bishop of Carlisle's home, where they drank his wine and returned home the next morning unscathed. The husband said, "If this is true, you must take me with you." "You cannot come, for you are no warlock," the witch told her husband. The following month, the husband hid in the corner and watched as his wife met with her friends. He watched as they gathered under the chimney and whispered the magic word and vanished as if in a puff of smoke. "I can do that," he thought to himself. He moved under the chimney, thought of the Bishop of Carlisle and the wine that he possessed, and said the word aloud. Before he knew it, he was flying on the midnight wind and found himself in the Bishop of Carlisle's basement with his wife and her friends. Well, his wife and friends were none too pleased, but figured it was too late to do anything. He cracked open the bishop's wine and started to drink. His wife and friends were careful, for they knew they had to leave, but the husband was not so. He drank himself drowsy and eventually passed out. He awoke to the bishop's guards kicking him. He tried to explain that he flew here on the north wind, for which he was accused of witchcraft. They seized him, tied him to a stake, and started to build a fire about him. He knew he was dead. They were going to burn him alive, and there was nothing he could do. When a raven approached and landed on his shoulder, it squealed and then flew off. The husband was delighted, for it was no raven that approached, but his wife, and the squeal to him sounded like the whisper of the magic word, a reminder of what to do. He said the word and vanished in a puff of wind, and before he knew it was at his home in Fife. He never again watched his wife or followed her. He never again asked where she went with the new moon, but lived the rest of his life quietly and letting his wife mind her own business. And that is our story of the witches of Fife. Let me know below your thoughts on witchcraft and if you knew about our sordid history with it. Are there any other stories on witches that you would like me to cover? Like and subscribe, and until next time, may the devil walk behind you. Bye for now.